Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, looking at the stars through the main window. His crew worked quietly around him, checking systems and preparing for what might be the most important meeting in human history. The message had come 3 days ago from a place called the Zephyrian Empire. They wanted to meet with humans for the first time. "Captain, we're getting close to their planet," said Dr. Lisa Carter from her station. She was the team's language expert, and she had been studying Zephyrian words and customs for months. "Their ship is approaching us now." Jake watched as a huge silver vessel came into view. It was beautiful and strange, with flowing lines that seemed to move like water. The ship was 3 times bigger than their own vessel, the USS Horizon. Jake felt a small worry in his stomach, but he pushed it away. This was humanity's chance to make friends with a powerful alien race. "They're sending us docking instructions," said Commander Ben Hayes from the communications desk. Ben was their cultural advisor and Jake's oldest friend. They had served together for 10 years. "Looks like they want us to follow them to the planet's surface." The Zephyrian homeworld was incredible. Cities of crystal and metal stretched across continents, and flying vehicles moved between tall towers that reached toward the clouds. Everything looked clean and organized, like a perfect picture. Jake had never seen anything so advanced. Their ship landed at a huge spaceport near the capital city. Through the windows, Jake could see hundreds of aliens waiting for them. The Zephyrians were tall and graceful, with skin that looked like it was made of crystal. Their skin changed colors slowly, shifting from blue to purple to green. They wore flowing robes and stood very straight, like they thought they were better than everyone else. "Remember," Jake told his small team as they prepared to leave the ship, "we're here to make peace. Stay calm no matter what happens. We represent all of humanity today." Lisa nodded nervously. She carried a translation device, but she had also learned to speak some of their language. Ben checked his uniform one last time and picked up a case containing gifts from Earth. The moment they stepped off their ship, Jake felt the weight of hundreds of alien eyes watching them. The Zephyrians stood in perfect rows, and they were all much taller than the humans. Their crystal skin reflected the light from their sun, making them seem to glow. At the front of the group stood several aliens wearing special robes covered in jewels. One of the jeweled aliens stepped forward. Jake guessed this was someone important. The alien spoke in a voice that sounded like music, but Jake couldn't understand the words. Lisa quickly activated her translator. "Welcome to Zephyros Prime, small beings from the distant world," the translation device said. "I am High Minister Zektal. You will follow us to the palace where the royal family waits to judge your worth." Jake noticed the word judge and didn't like it, but he smiled and nodded. "We are honored to be here," he said. "I am Captain Jake Morrison, representing the people of Earth." High Minister Zektal looked at Jake for a long moment, and his skin shifted to a darker purple color. Then he turned and began walking toward a group of floating vehicles. The humans followed, surrounded by guards who were even taller than the other aliens. The ride to the palace was silent but amazing. They flew over the crystal city, and Jake could see gardens and fountains everywhere. The Zephyrians had built their world to be beautiful, but everything looked cold and perfect. There were no signs of normal life, no children playing or people just sitting and talking. The palace was the most incredible building Jake had ever seen. It was made of crystal and metal that seemed to grow from the ground like a living thing. Towers twisted up into the sky, and bridges connected different sections high above the ground. Guards in shining armor stood at every entrance. Inside the palace was even more impressive. The walls were covered in moving pictures that told stories Jake couldn't understand. The floors were made of smooth stone that felt warm under their feet. Everything echoed with their footsteps as they walked through long hallways. Finally, they entered a huge room with a ceiling so high that Jake couldn't see the top. Hundreds of Zephyrians stood along the walls, all wearing fancy robes. At the far end of the room was a platform with several large chairs made of what looked like solid crystal. "The royal family," Ben whispered to Jake. Sitting in the largest chair was an alien who was clearly very important. Her skin was pure white crystal, and her robes were covered in gems that caught the light. But it was the younger alien sitting beside her who caught Jake's attention. This one was smaller, and her crystal skin kept changing colors quickly, from gold to red to blue. She was watching the humans with obvious interest and amusement. High Minister Zektal spoke loudly to the room. "Presenting the creatures from the world called Earth. They call themselves humans." The way he said humans made it sound like something dirty. Jake felt his team tense up beside him, but he kept his face calm. The young alien on the platform stood up and walked closer to them. She was beautiful in an alien way, but there was something about her smile that Jake didn't trust. She began to speak in the old form of Zephyrian language, and her voice was clear and musical. Lisa's translator started working, but Jake realized he understood some of what she was saying without it. He had studied their language more than he had told his team. The young alien was making jokes about how small and weak the humans looked. She suggested they might be better as pets than as visitors. The other aliens in the room made sounds that Jake realized was laughter. The young alien continued her speech, calling humans primitive creatures and wondering if they were smart enough to understand simple concepts. Jake felt anger building in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. This was clearly a test of some kind. He looked directly at the young alien and saw surprise flash across her face when she realized he understood her words. "I am Princess Kirith," she said, switching to the common trade language, youngest daughter of Empress Veltara. "You are in the presence of royalty, little human. Do you understand what that means?" Jake looked at her steadily and replied in perfect ancient Zephyrian, "I understand perfectly, Your Highness. I also understand everything you just said about my people." The room fell completely silent. Princess Kirith's skin turned bright red, then gold, then settled on an angry purple. She had not expected the human to understand her insults. Now the real test would begin. Princess Kirith stared at Jake with wide eyes. Her crystal skin kept changing colors rapidly, showing her confusion and anger. The silence in the great hall stretched on until it became uncomfortable. None of the other aliens had ever seen their princess speechless before. The large alien on the crystal throne finally stood up. She was even more impressive than her daughter, with skin like pure white diamond and eyes that seemed to see everything. When she moved, the light in the room seemed to bend around her. This had to be Empress Veltara, the ruler of the Zephyrian Empire. "Interesting," the Empress said in perfect English. Her voice was cold and sharp like breaking glass. "The small creature has learned our ancient tongue. Tell me, human, what else can you do?" Jake felt his heart beating fast, but he kept his voice steady. "We humans learn quickly, Your Majesty. We adapt to new situations. It's one of our strengths." Princess Kirith recovered from her surprise and stepped closer to Jake. Her skin was now a bright orange color, which Jake guessed meant she was angry. "Adapt? You mean you copy what others do because you have no culture of your own?" "I mean we learn from others and make it our own," Jake replied calmly. "It's helped us survive and grow as a species." The princess laughed, but it wasn't a nice sound. "Survive? You haven't seen real challenges yet, little human. Your species is young and weak. You know nothing of true strength or honor." Jake noticed that other aliens in the room were nodding their heads in agreement. It was clear that the Zephyrians thought they were better than everyone else. He also noticed that some of the aliens standing near the walls were not Zephyrians. They were different species and they looked nervous and scared. These had to be representatives from worlds that the Zephyrian Empire controlled. "Perhaps," Princess Kirith continued, "you would like to prove that humans are more than clever pets? We have some simple tests that even children of our species can complete." Jake looked at Ben and Lisa. Ben shook his head slightly, warning Jake not to accept, but Jake knew this was important. If he refused, the Zephyrians would always see humans as weak and inferior. "What kind of tests?" Jake asked. Princess Kirith's skin turned bright gold, showing her excitement. "Physical challenges, mental puzzles, tests of will and courage. Nothing too difficult for a species that claims to be able to adapt." "Kirith," the Empress said sharply, "do not play games with our guests." But Princess Kirith ignored her mother's warning. "Unless, of course, you're afraid. We would understand if humans are too fragile for real challenges." Jake felt the trap closing around him, but he also saw an opportunity. If he could prove that humans were strong and capable, it might change how the Zephyrians saw his entire species. "I accept your challenges," Jake said firmly. Ben grabbed his arm. "Captain, this isn't wise. We don't know what we're dealing with here." "I know what I'm doing," Jake whispered back. Then he spoke louder so everyone could hear. "But I want to make the terms clear. This isn't just about me. This is about how your empire will treat humanity in the future." Princess Kirith's eyes lit up with interest. "Agreed. If you fail, your species will be considered inferior and will be treated as such. If you somehow succeed," she looked at her mother, then back at Jake, "we will reconsider our opinion of humans." Empress Veltara sat back down in her throne, watching everything with calculating eyes. Jake had the feeling that she was more interested in learning about human capabilities than in having fun like her daughter. The first test was combat. 2 Zephyrian warriors entered the hall, carrying long staffs made of crystal. They moved like dancers, spinning and jumping with incredible grace. Princess Kirith handed Jake a similar weapon. "The rules are simple," she explained. "First to be knocked down loses. Try not to embarrass yourself too badly." Jake took the crystal staff and felt its weight. It was heavier than it looked, but perfectly balanced. The 2 warriors circled him, moving in a pattern that was clearly practiced many times. The first warrior attacked with a spinning strike aimed at Jake's head. Jake ducked and swept his staff low, trying to trip his opponent. The Zephyrian jumped over the sweep and brought his staff down hard. Jake rolled sideways and came up with his weapon ready. The second warrior joined the attack, and now Jake was fighting 2 opponents at once. Their movements were beautiful and deadly, like a deadly dance. But Jake noticed something important. They were fighting according to patterns, like they had trained the same way for years. Jake had trained in many different fighting styles during his military career. He had learned that real combat wasn't about perfect technique. It was about adapting to whatever your opponent did. He started mixing different fighting styles, using boxing footwork with sword techniques in military hand-to-hand combat. The Zephyrian warriors began to look confused. They weren't used to opponents who changed styles in the middle of a fight. Jake used their confusion to his advantage, catching the first warrior off guard with a strike that knocked him to the ground. The second warrior attacked more desperately, but Jake was ready. He trapped the alien's weapon and used leverage to flip him onto his back. The hall was completely silent. Princess Kirith stared at Jake with her mouth open. Her skin had turned a pale blue color that Jake couldn't interpret. "Lucky," she said finally. "The mental challenges will be different." The mental test involved solving a 3-dimensional puzzle made of floating crystal pieces. Jake had to arrange them into a specific pattern while the pieces kept moving and changing shape. It was incredibly difficult, and Jake could see why most people would fail. But Jake had always been good at thinking in 3 dimensions. He had trained as a pilot before becoming a ship captain, and spatial thinking was natural to him. More importantly, he approached the puzzle differently than the Zephyrians expected. Instead of trying to force the pieces into place, he watched their natural movements and found ways to work with them. The puzzle clicked into place just as Princess Kirith was starting to look smug. Her skin flashed bright red with surprise and anger. "That was adequate," she admitted. "But the final test will prove what humans really are." The final test was called the Challenge of Will. Jake had to stand perfectly still while alien machines created illusions around him, images of his ship being destroyed, his crew being hurt, Earth being attacked. The goal was to show no reaction and no emotion, proving that he had perfect self-control. This test was harder than the others because it attacked what Jake cared about most: protecting others. The illusions were so real that he wanted to move, to fight, to do something to help, but he forced himself to remember that it was all fake. The test went on for what felt like hours. Jake's muscles ached from standing still and sweat ran down his face, but he didn't move. He thought about his crew, about humanity, about the importance of this moment. He couldn't let his people down. Finally, the illusion stopped. Jake was still standing, though his whole body was shaking from the effort. Princess Kirith walked up to him, and for the first time her expression wasn't mocking or amused. "How?" she asked quietly. "How did you resist?" "Because I had a reason to," Jake replied. "I wasn't just proving myself. I was proving what humans can do when we have something worth fighting for." Princess Kirith looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to her mother, and Jake saw something in her face that looked like respect. But Empress Veltara's expression was much harder to read, and Jake realized that passing the princess's tests might have created a bigger problem than he expected. Empress Veltara stood up from her crystal throne and walked slowly toward Jake. Every step she took seemed to make the air in the great hall grow colder. The other aliens moved aside as she passed, their heads bowed in respect and fear. Jake could feel the power radiating from her like heat from a fire. "You have surprised my daughter," the Empress said, stopping directly in front of Jake. She was much taller than him, and her white crystal skin seemed to glow with its own light. "But children are easily impressed." "I am not." Jake met her gaze steadily. even though every instinct told him to look away. "I understand, Your Majesty. What would it take to impress you?" A cold smile appeared on the Empress's face. "There is an ancient trial in our culture called the Trial of Worthiness. It was created thousands of years ago to determine who deserves to stand as an equal among our people. No alien has ever been offered this trial. No alien has ever survived it." Princess Kirith's skin turned bright white, showing her shock. "Mother, you can't be serious. The Trial of Worthiness is dangerous?" The Empress finished. "Yes, often fatal. Yes. But if this human truly believes his species deserves respect, let him prove it properly." Jake felt Ben grab his arm again. "Captain, don't do this. We don't know what this trial involves. It could be suicide." Dr. Lisa Carter stepped forward. "I've been studying their culture. The Trial of Worthiness isn't just dangerous, it's designed to be impossible for outsiders. No non-Zephyrian has ever even attempted it." But Jake was already thinking beyond the immediate danger. He looked around the Great Hall and saw the representatives from other alien species watching him with hope in their eyes. These beings had been conquered by the Zephyrian Empire and forced to serve. If he could succeed where no one else had, it might give them hope. More importantly, it would prove that humans were not just another species to be conquered. "What exactly does this trial involve?" Jake asked. Empress Veltara's smile grew wider. 3 parts as tradition demands. First, you must prove your physical strength and skill in combat against our finest warriors. Not the children you faced before, but true masters of war. Second, you must demonstrate wisdom by solving problems that have challenged our greatest thinkers. Third, you must show spiritual strength by connecting with the Great Flow, the energy that binds all life together. "And if I fail, you die," the Empress said simply. "Or worse, you live as a broken mind, a warning to others who might challenge our superiority." Jake looked at his team. Ben was shaking his head frantically, while Lisa looked terrified. But Jake also saw something else in their eyes. Trust. They believed in him even if they thought he was making a terrible mistake. "I accept," Jake said firmly. The Great Hall erupted in surprised voices. Even the Zephyrian nobles seemed shocked that the human would agree to such a dangerous trial. Princess Kirith stepped closer to Jake, and her skin was now cycling rapidly through different colors. "You're insane," she said quietly. "The trial has killed Zephyrians who trained their entire lives for it. What makes you think a human can succeed?" Jake looked at her steadily. "Because I'm not trying to be a Zephyrian. I'm trying to be human." The first part of the trial began immediately. Jake was taken to a circular arena deep inside the palace. The walls were made of crystal that amplified sound, so every clash of weapons echoed like thunder. Thousands of aliens filled the seats above, all waiting to watch the human fail. His opponents were 3 Zephyrian masters, warriors who had spent centuries perfecting their skills. They moved like liquid lightning, their crystal skin gleaming under the arena lights. Each one carried weapons that looked like they were made from captured starlight. Jake was given similar weapons, but he had only minutes to learn how to use them. The weapons were alive in a way that human technology wasn't. They responded to thoughts and emotions as much as to physical movements. The battle began without warning. All 3 masters attacked at once, moving in perfect coordination. Their weapons created patterns of light that were beautiful and deadly. Jake had to rely on every fighting skill he had ever learned, plus some he had to invent on the spot. The first few minutes were pure survival. Jake dodged and blocked, learning his opponent's styles while trying not to die. But gradually he began to understand something important. The Zephyrian fighting style was perfect and precise, but it was also predictable. They followed ancient forms that had been unchanged for thousands of years. Jake began to fight like a human, unpredictable, adaptive, using whatever worked. He combined techniques from different martial arts, mixed in military combat training, and even used some moves he remembered from sports. His style was messy compared to theirs, but it was also impossible to predict. One by one, Jake defeated the masters, not by being better at their own fighting style, but by being so different that they couldn't counter him. When the last master fell, the arena fell silent except for the sound of Jake breathing heavily. The mental challenges were even harder. Jake was presented with problems that had puzzled Zephyrian scholars for generations. Mathematical equations that described the movement of entire galaxies, philosophical questions about the nature of consciousness, strategic puzzles that involved managing resources across dozens of worlds. Jake approached each problem differently than a Zephyrian would. Where they looked for perfect, elegant solutions, he looked for solutions that worked. Where they tried to understand everything before acting, he was willing to try things and learn from mistakes. His answers weren't always pretty, but they were effective. Dr. Carter watched from the observation area, taking notes on everything she saw. She realized that Jake wasn't just solving problems. He was showing the Zephyrians a completely different way of thinking. The final challenge was the most difficult. Jake had to connect with something the Zephyrians called the Great Flow, a kind of mystical energy that connected all living things. For Zephyrians, this connection came naturally. For aliens, it was supposedly impossible. Jake was taken to a special chamber at the top of the highest tower. The room was empty except for a pool of perfectly still water in the center. He was told to sit beside the pool and reach out with his mind until he could feel the life energy of every being in the palace. Hours passed. Jake sat in meditation, trying to feel something he wasn't sure existed. His back ached, his legs cramped, and doubt began to creep into his mind. Maybe the Zephyrians were right. Maybe humans really were inferior. Then he thought about his crew, waiting and worrying about him. He thought about the billions of humans back on Earth, living their lives and dreaming of the stars. He thought about all the conquered species he had seen in the palace, hoping for someone to prove that the Zephyrians weren't invincible. Suddenly, Jake felt it. Not just the mystical energy the Zephyrians talked about, but something more practical and real. He felt connected to everyone who depended on him, everyone he was responsible for protecting. The connection wasn't mystical. It was emotional and moral. It was the human capacity for caring about others, even strangers. The water in the pool began to glow with soft light. Jake opened his eyes and saw Princess Kireth standing in the doorway, staring at him in amazement. Her skin was pure gold, showing wonder and something that might have been admiration. "Impossible," she whispered. "You've done it. You've actually completed the trial of worthiness." But as Jake stood up, feeling exhausted but triumphant, he saw the expression on Princess Kireth's face change from wonder to fear. "My mother," she said urgently. "She never expected you to succeed. She was counting on your failure to justify." "Other plans? What other plans?" Jake asked, though he was already afraid he knew the answer. "Plans for humanity," Princess Kireth said grimly. "Plans that won't change just because you've proven yourself worthy." Princess Kireth led Jake through hidden passages in the palace walls. Her crystal skin kept shifting between nervous purple and worried blue as they moved quickly through the narrow corridors. Jake could hear the sounds of celebration coming from the great hall below, where the Zephyrian nobles were still talking about his impossible success in the trial of worthiness. "Where are we going?" Jake asked quietly. "Somewhere we can talk without being overheard," she replied. "What I have to tell you could be considered treason against the Empire." They emerged into a small garden hidden high in one of the palace towers. Strange alien flowers glowed softly in the darkness, and the air smelled like cinnamon and starlight. Jake could see the lights of the crystal city spread out below them, beautiful and cold. Princess Kireth turned to face him, and Jake was surprised to see real fear in her eyes. "My mother never intended to honor any agreement with humanity," she said. "Your success in the trial has only made things worse." "What do you mean?" "The trial of worthiness was supposed to kill you," she explained. "When you died, my mother would have told your people that humans were too weak to be trusted with advanced technology or space travel. It would have justified keeping your species confined to your own star system." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "And now that I've succeeded?" "Now she sees humans as a genuine threat," Princess Kireth said grimly. "You've proven that your species has abilities we never suspected. You adapt faster than we do. You think in ways we don't understand. You succeeded at trials that were designed to be impossible for non-Zephyrians." Jake began to understand the terrible trap he had walked into. So instead of seeing humans as too weak to worry about, she now sees us as too dangerous to ignore. Exactly. Princess Kireth's skin turned deep red, showing her anger. Even now she's meeting with her war council. They're discussing a preemptive strike against your homeworld and colonies. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He thought of Earth, of the billions of people who had no idea that their first contact with aliens might lead to their destruction. "How long do we have?" "The attack fleet is already being prepared," she said. "They call it a cultural exchange mission. to avoid suspicion. But the ships are loaded with weapons that could devastate entire continents. They'll leave within days. Jake felt panic rising in his chest, but he forced himself to think clearly. This was exactly the kind of crisis that his military training had prepared him for. Impossible odds, limited time, and the lives of countless innocent people hanging in the balance. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "You're risking everything to warn me." Princess Kirith looked away, her skin cycling through several colors before settling on gold. "Because you were right earlier. You didn't try to become a Zephyrian. You stayed human, and that made you stronger than any of us expected. You made me realize that maybe being different isn't the same as being inferior." She turned back to him, and Jake saw determination in her alien features. "My people have ruled through fear and superiority for thousands of years. We've conquered dozens of species and forced them to serve us. But today, watching you, I saw something I've never seen before. Someone who was strong without needing to make others weak." "What about the other species?" Jake asked, thinking of the nervous alien representatives he had seen in the Great Hall. "The ones your empire has already conquered?" "They hate us," Princess Kirith admitted. "But they're too afraid to rebel. They've been beaten down for so long that they've forgotten how to hope." She paused, then added, "Until today, when you succeeded at the trial, I saw something change in their eyes." Jake began to form a desperate plan. Could they be convinced to act? If they knew that someone was finally standing up to your empire? Maybe, she said cautiously. But it would be incredibly dangerous. My mother has spies everywhere, and the penalty for rebellion is death for entire species. Sometimes dangerous is the only option left, Jake said firmly. I need to get a message to my ship. My crew needs to warn Earth about the coming attack. Princess Kirith shook her head. Impossible. The palace is surrounded by jamming fields that block all communications. Your ship can't send or receive messages. Jake thought for a moment. Then I need to create a distraction big enough to get my crew's attention. Something that will let them know they need to escape and warn Earth immediately. What kind of distraction? The kind that will probably get us both killed, Jake said grimly. But first I need to know more about these other species. Who are their leaders? How many are here in the palace? And most importantly, are any of them willing to take a stand if they think they have a chance of winning? Princess Kirith began to tell him about the conquered peoples. The Volari were insect-like beings whose homeworld had been strip-mined for resources. The Neth were peaceful aquatic creatures whose oceans had been poisoned to force them into service. The Korgan were strong warriors who had been enslaved after their planet was destroyed. Each species had representatives in the palace, either as servants, advisors, or prisoners. All of them had reasons to hate the Zephyrian Empire, but none of them had ever had hope that resistance was possible. There's something else you need to know, Princess Kirith said quietly. My mother has been studying human transmissions for months. She knows the locations of your major colonies, your military bases, even your communication frequencies. The attack won't just be on Earth. It will be coordinated strikes designed to cripple your entire civilization in one blow. Jake felt the full weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. It wasn't just about proving humanity's worth anymore. It was about survival. I need you to do something for me, he said. Tomorrow, when your mother holds the ceremony to announce the results of my trial, I want you to make sure representatives from all the conquered species are present. Why? Because I'm going to give them something they haven't had in a long time. Hope. And when people have hope, they can do things that seem impossible. Princess Kirith stared at him. You're planning to start a rebellion, right here in the heart of the Empire. I'm planning to give your mother a choice, Jake corrected. She can honor the results of the trial and treat humanity as equals, or she can face the consequences of ruling through fear instead of respect. She'll never back down, Princess Kirith warned. My mother would rather destroy the palace than admit she was wrong. Jake smiled grimly. Then I guess we'll find out tomorrow just how much trouble one human can cause when he has nothing left to lose. As they prepared to return to their separate quarters, Princess Kirith touched Jake's arm. Her skin was pure silver, showing uncertainty and something else he couldn't identify. Jake, she said softly, thank you. For showing me that strength doesn't have to mean cruelty, for proving that my people aren't as superior as we thought, and for giving me the courage to do what's right instead of what's safe. Jake looked at her and realized that somewhere in the course of this impossible day, the The spoiled princess who had mocked him had become someone he genuinely respected. "Thank you for warning me," he replied, "and for choosing to stand with me instead of your empire." "I just hope we both survive what's coming," she said. Jake thought about his crew, about Earth, about all the species depending on what happened in the next few hours. "We will," he said with more confidence than he felt. "We have to." The Great Hall was packed with more aliens than Jake had ever seen in one place. Word of the humans' success in the trial of worthiness had spread throughout the palace and beyond. Zephyrian nobles filled the crystal galleries above, while representatives from conquered worlds stood in nervous groups near the walls. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Jake walked into the hall between two guards wearing the simple uniform he had arrived in. He had refused the ceremonial robes that Princess Kirith had offered him. Today he needed to be completely human. Empress Veltara sat on her crystal throne, dressed in robes that seemed to be made of liquid starlight. Her white diamond skin reflected the light from the walls, making her appear to glow with inner fire. Beside her, Princess Kirith sat stiffly, her own skin cycling nervously through different colors. High Minister Zektal stood and announced in his musical voice, "We gathered today to witness the results of the trial of worthiness attempted by the human Jake Morrison. By ancient law, success in this trial grants the participant the right to be treated as an equal among our people." A murmur ran through the assembled crowd. Jake could see surprise and uncertainty on many faces. No alien had ever completed the trial before. Empress Veltara rose from her throne and walked slowly to the center of the hall. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the vast room. "The human has indeed completed the trial," she announced. "But completing a trial and deserving respect are not the same thing. Today we will see what this human truly is." Jake felt the trap closing around him, but he was ready. He had spent the night preparing for this moment, thinking about everything Princess Kirith had told him about the other species and their suffering under Zephyrian rule. "I call upon Jake Morrison to kneel before the Empress of the Zephyrian Empire," High Minister Zektal declared, "to accept his place in our hierarchy and acknowledge the eternal superiority of our people." This was the moment Jake had been waiting for. He looked around the Great Hall, making eye contact with as many of the conquered species as possible. He saw Valari with their insect-like features, Neth, whose blue-green skin showed they were far from their water homes, Korgan, whose massive frames were stooped in defeat. All of them watched him with desperate hope. "I will not kneel," Jake said clearly. The words echoed through the hall like thunder. Gasps and surprised cries came from every direction. No one had ever refused a direct command from the Empress. Empress Veltara's skin turned pure white, showing her rage. "You dare defy me? After I granted you the honor of the trial?" "The trial wasn't an honor," Jake replied, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "It was a test designed to kill me. You never intended to treat humanity as equals. No matter what the result was, how dare you—" the Empress began. But Jake continued speaking. "You rule through fear," he said, addressing not just the Empress but everyone in the hall. "You conquer other species and force them to serve you. You tell yourselves that you're superior, but what you really are is bullies." Princess Kirith's skin flashed bright gold, showing her amazement at Jake's boldness. Around the hall, the conquered peoples were standing straighter, listening to words they had never heard anyone dare to speak. "I know about your attack fleet," Jake continued. "Ships disguised as a cultural mission, loaded with weapons to destroy human worlds. You plan to eliminate my entire species because we proved we couldn't be easily conquered." Now there were shouts of anger from the Zephyrian nobles, but also sounds of surprise from the conquered species. They were learning that they weren't the only ones threatened by Zephyrian aggression. Empress Veltara's voice cut through the noise like ice. "Silence. Guards, arrest this creature for treason against the Empire." But something unexpected happened. The guards hesitated. According to their own ancient laws, Jake had earned the right to be treated as an equal through the trial of worthiness. Arresting him would violate traditions that had been sacred for thousands of years. In that moment of hesitation, Princess Kirith stood up from her throne. Her skin was pure gold, showing determination and courage. "He completed the trial fairly," she declared. "By our own laws, he has earned the right to speak as an equal." "Kirith," her mother snapped. "You forget yourself." "No, mother," the princess replied firmly. "I remember myself. I remember what our people used to believe before we became conquerors. We used to honor strength and courage, not just the ability to dominate others. Jake seized the moment. Look around this hall, he called out to everyone present. Look at the representatives from the worlds you've conquered. They're here as slaves and prisoners, not as honored guests. Is this the legacy you want? Is this the kind of empire that deserves to rule the galaxy? A Valari representative stepped forward, her insect-like features showing determination. The human speaks truth, she clicked in her species language, which the translators quickly converted. We have served in fear for too long. A massive Korgan warrior straightened to his full height, towering over even the Zephyrians. My people were once proud fighters. We remember freedom. One by one, representatives from the conquered species began to step forward, their voices joining together in defiance that had been building for generations. Empress Veltara looked around the hall with growing fury. This is rebellion. The penalty for rebellion is death. Then you'll have to kill all of us, Jake said calmly. Every species in this hall. Every person who believes in freedom instead of fear. But if you do that, you'll prove that your empire was built on nothing but violence. The Empress raised her hand and Jake could see energy building around her fingers. She had powers that could kill him instantly, but Princess Kirith stepped between them. Mother, stop, she pleaded. Look what we've become. Look what our empire has turned us into. We're not superior beings, we're just bullies with advanced weapons. Move aside, daughter, the Empress snarled. This human has corrupted your mind with his weakness. He hasn't corrupted me, Princess Kirith replied. He's shown me what real strength looks like. Real strength protects others instead of dominating them. Real strength builds up instead of tearing down. The tension in the hall was so thick that Jake could feel it like a weight on his chest. The Empress stood with deadly energy crackling around her hands, while her daughter and a human stood between her and the crowd of newly defiant beings. Then something happened that no one expected. Commander Ben Hayes and Dr. Lisa Carter burst into the hall, followed by Jake's security team. They had somehow escaped from their quarters and made it through the palace guards. Captain, Ben called out. We got your signal. The ship is ready for emergency departure. Jake realized that his defiance in the Great Hall had been broadcast throughout the palace. His crew had seen everything and prepared their escape. Empress Veltara turned toward the new arrivals, her attention divided. In that moment, Princess Kirith made her choice. Instead of stepping aside, she moved closer to Jake. I stand with them, she declared. I stand with everyone who believes in freedom. The hall erupted in chaos. Some Zephyrian nobles supported their empress while others seemed uncertain. The conquered species rallied around Jake and the princess, finally finding the courage to openly defy their oppressors. Kneel now, Empress Veltara screamed, her voice echoing with power. All of you, kneel before your empress. Jake looked around the hall at all the beings who had found the courage to stand up. He thought about Earth, about humanity, about the future they were all fighting for. We will never kneel to tyranny, he said firmly. Not now, not ever. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the Great Hall of the Zephyrian Empire was filled with beings who refused to bow. The revolution had begun, and it started with one human who wouldn't kneel.